Welcome to a new podcast. We're beginning a
Thank
series
you.
of discussions based on a workbook called Radical Grace in the Economy. And first of all, I'll read to you the description of exactly what we're doing. This is an overview of a workbook on how mainstream economics makes fundamental value judgments which violate key spiritual values. It addresses 9 areas where the foundations of economics rest on assertions which are not acceptable to people of the spirit. And it discusses how applying deeper values drawn from the insights of Franciscan and indigenous economics can move us towards an economy of spirit. Now, I'm with Jotie Noel, a friend of mine and a fellow Franciscan. We're both members of the Anglican Franciscan Order. And we met at our convocation in Phoenix a couple of months ago and both liked the idea of this workbook. I'm the author of it, by the way. We both wanted to see how we can get some discussions going. So I'm Gary Russell. I'm from Winnipeg, Manitoba in Canada. I taught economics for many years at various universities, including several universities in China. And I'm kind of retired from teaching and put together this workbook myself. I'm the author of it. And then put it out to some people who might be interested in talking about it. So my co-host now is the fellow you see on the left side of your screen, Jotie Noel.
I'm visiting you this afternoon from Paradise, Newfoundland, Canada. And yes, as a fellow Franciscan in the Third Order, I'm very much interested in all aspects of our lives and how such common things as the economy impacts our lives positively or negatively. So I was really taken in by the title of your workbook, Radical Grace and the Economy. And I was really impressed with your overview. The fact you've chosen 9 points are rather interesting. But I have lots of questions for you, and hopefully you have the answers.
Well, I got lots of questions for you. You got to give some answers.
Okay, so great, great.
So we just want to get people addressing the topic from a different frame from what we're used to. It comes from the sense that our economic culture and ideology has abandoned those spiritual values that many of us feel are important. In fact, it's turned many of those values on their head and negated them. So this workbook comes from a need to turn our values right side up again in the economic sphere. And there can be no more radical reimagining than that. And partly we're here as Franciscans because in their religious sphere there's kind of no one more radical than St. Francis, eh? You think, Jotie?
Well, he was radical against the institution of his time, so much so that, even though the Pope granted him the first rule, I don't know if the Pope actually thought Francis was going to go through with this or that his order would last for very long. But it was so authentic and so Christ-like, walking in the footprints of Jesus, that it grew incredibly. And the Franciscan order has always been the fringe order of the church because of its radical nature. So what we're doing is fully in keeping with how Francis interpreted life in his time.
Yeah, Richard Rohr, a prominent current Franciscan, calls it living on the edge of the inside, remaining inside the church, but are on, like you said, the fringes of it. What we're doing is a casual exploration. It's not going to be academic, even though I'm an academic. Maybe I'll call myself a reformed academic. We want to talk with people who think they don't know anything about economics. And Jotie, you being one of those, eh?
Now I know why you've invited me into this podcast.
No, your approach will be quite valuable. So we'll be co-hosting. We'll have a guest. We don't have a guest today, but normally we'll have one, maybe 2 guests, maybe more, who knows. We're very casual about this. We're very experimental about this, flying by the seat of our pants.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So we're going to involve ourselves in a conversation about the economy. And, the peculiarity is we're coming from a Franciscan perspective and background, which we're fully informed about. I mean, we've been around a while in the order. And with regards to the economy, although you're an economist and wrote this, I mean, this is kind of open for discussion. So wherever it goes and wherever it leads, it's going to be okay, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And no matter how heretical we get, it'll still be okay.
Right.
I often call myself an anti-economist nowadays because when I was teaching this stuff, my heart wasn't in it. There were just so many things in there that I just didn't buy into. And, if you don't really believe what you're teaching, you're going to be a crappy teacher. And I probably was. But now I'm getting into something that resonates with me. And so I'm hoping that I can present it well. We're going to run through the overview. That's all we're going to do today. Just Jotie and I. We'll have a guest next time. We don't have an exact schedule yet. You have a lot of freedom with a podcast. You can play it by ear. You can have it once a week or once a month or maybe go 2 months, because all it is a list on the podcast venue. So we'll sort of freely choose who we're going to talk to, people who might be interesting. Now we're going to go look at the overview. I want to give one more thing about the discussion questions that arise from this overview. It starts with a couple of sections on the issues, like the first one's called radical grace or grace versus transactional ways of living together. There will first be a couple of sections and discussion questions on the issues that arise. And then after that, we will do a section of discussion questions on how Franciscans approach this specifically. And following that will be a section on how do Indigenous people approach these questions, because the workbook is billed as Franciscan/Indigenous economics. Because in my studying it, I found a lot of overlap between the Franciscan approach and the Indigenous approaches to economics. Then the workbook, in the discussion part, the workbook is followed by a section on the culture we live in, and how certain ideas are ingrained in the culture and what we can do about changing that, or at least having some effect on it, or at least getting people to think a little more broadly in a cultural context. And then the last section is, okay, what kind of policies can we recommend to groups and to governments? That's about as political as it gets. I'm not planning to get too much into the politics of it. I'm more interested in the issues. And actually, my attitude is I just want to get people talking in this frame of thought. I don't care where you go with it. I just want to see the conversation happening in a different way. There are 9 sections: denial of grace, denial of vocation. We'll go briefly through all of them today, just the two of us. Denial of the individual. In the end, it's called denial of entitlement. I want to talk about each of those, starting with denial of grace. Conventional economics leaves no space for, indeed denies space for, any concept of love or grace. It's entirely transactional in nature. Its highest virtue is fair trade, which offers no value to anyone that isn't taken back. An economy of spirit, that's what I call us, economy of spirit, brings the grace of unconditional love and gratuitous living to human relations of exchange, although having to temper it with the need to engage in transactional relations when grace is absent. The first thing I'm thinking, Jotie, is we talked about this before, and you were wondering if people are going to have a clear idea of what I meant by that word transactional. Is that throwing a big word at people that they're not going to be sure what to do with it? What do you think transactional means?
I think it means that something is given and something is received.
Something given and something is taken back, yeah, as opposed to grace. Then what does grace mean in contrast with that?
Well, grace is something freely given.
Freely given, yeah. Now, the highest, the way I like to put it, the highest value in economics and in economic society, the highest value is fair trade. You give equal to what you get. And in economics, there can be nothing higher than that. Well, taking it from a Christian perspective, Christ did not say, give equal to what you get. Christ said, just give. And we are trying to create a society in which everyone is in giving mode and everyone makes sure everyone gets what they want. But what about this fair trade thing? What's so wrong with fair trade? I mean, I'm talking as if fair trade is a bad thing. Do you think fair trade is a bad thing?
One would think fair trade would be a norm. I mean, receiving receiving the same value for what is given
Exactly. Yeah,
seems to have a degree of authenticity about it, that a service or good offered and receiving the same value of a service and good, and one equals out the other. So one would think that
yeah.
yeah, that seems sensible in a culture that has to exchange goods and services for goods and services. Yeah,
So,
sounds great.
so how come I'm complaining about it? What's
Well, I
so
don't know what you're
very
complaining about. You're saying you're saying that conventional economics leaves no space for a concept of love and grace. So I don't think you mean that I am free to take some of my possessions and give them away. I mean, I'm free to do that in today's economy. I mean, I can give away money, I can give away services, I can give away time, and I can do that. But that's not what this means, is it?
well, for one thing, just as an aside to that, the discipline of economics would treat giving away and love and grace would treat that as irrational behavior. Because rational behavior is, trying to get the most with what you've got. And people who just want to give everything away would be kind of a crank in that realm. But Jesus said, give everything away, did he not? Or that at least
Well,
go ahead.
yeah. So I have no idea what conventional economics says or thinks. I mean, I have no idea. But I think that we live in a culture which has a system to function in terms of goods and services. And in the functioning of that goods and services, there has to be a way and means for people to receive what's needed. And the way you do it, I guess, is you offer back to the economy what's needed. And in return, you are given, you know, something, in this case, I suppose, money and pay to purchase what you need. So I guess that's transactional. You give and
Mhm.
receive. You give so that you can receive.
Yeah.
The principle is, though, if I'm not prepared to give, I can't receive in economics, right? If I'm not prepared to give
Hmm.
anything, then I cannot receive anything. Well, then I can't function. Or if
Well,
I have nothing to give, if I feel I have nothing to give, I don't receive anything. So, I understand that in the principle of economics, there has to be an exchange.
yeah,
Does it
economics is
not?
all about exchange. That's right. One of the things I think about in reference to this is going to the New Testament of the Bible, the Acts of the Apostles. Parts of it describe how the followers of Jesus, once he left, the followers of Jesus set up a societal relationship amongst them where everybody's in giving mode and don't pay attention to or are not giving for the sake of receiving. Everyone's in giving mode, and because everyone's in giving mode, everyone makes sure that people get what they need, and they set that up as an alternative to a transactional society. So one of my questions is, was Christ being naive there? Can that actually work? Can grace work?
Well, if we're putting a dollar figure on it, if we're saying there's no exchange, can it function? How does it survive? Unless the whole world becomes Christian, it cannot survive because the Christian faith, the community, has to function in a society somehow to get
Yeah.
food, to get a place to sleep. The early church was the recipient of the gifts and proceeds from people's land and wealth. But those people were involved in transactional, you know, principles to accumulate the wealth and have the land in the beginning. How could it continue if 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 the Christians only survived on everything being held in common forever?
So my provocative question is, was Christ being naive to think they could do that? But one of the issues you raised around that was, what if not everybody's in giving mode? Then you're going to have people who are giving away everything and hoping their society will take care of them, along with people who are grabbing what they can get. Then aren't the people who are giving away everything going to starve to death because they're going to end up with nothing? They'll be giving away and everybody else will be taking. And so there's a question of the practicality of grace. And yet we're Christians. We put a high value on grace. And yet, is it impractical?
Well, I guess we need a mechanism or an economy for a culture to just continue to exist. And there has to be an exchange in any culture. There has to be an exchange. You call it transactional. I call it an exchange of, something to enable goods and services, food, to flow, to move, to be moved. The early church benefited from the generosity of wealthy people, holding all things in common, but that did not continue as a principle of the church for very long. St. Paul himself exercised his tent-making skills when he visited people. He said he didn't rely on any charity. He said he always worked for a living, and a laborer deserves his hire. So, I think the early church was wrestling with this issue, partly because they thought Jesus was coming very soon, and there was no need to lay aside wealth and have a savings account or get involved in investments on the stock market, because Jesus is coming soon, and there won't be much time. And that was part of that expectation, that the parousia was coming very soon.
Yes, that's
right.
So
why don't we just hold everything in common and bide our time together as a faith community until then?
I'm taking grace to mean that I use my skills or my abilities and my resources to give you something, not for the sake of getting something back, but just because out of my love for you and everybody else, I want you to have that. And I'm hoping that you do the same. You may give me what I need, not in order to get anything back or because you got anything from me. You're giving just because you think I want that, you think I need that. And so the culture of grace would be that kind of culture where there is still exchange, but it's not done for the purpose of getting back something equal to what you get. It's done for the purpose of loving the person that you're giving it to. And the kind of question I raised, that does that work? Is that practical? Is that ever going to happen? So I'm not denying exchange happens. Exchange has to happen.
I can see why in conventional economics, it has to be transactional.
Oh yeah, absolutely. It is a transactional discipline, totally. Yeah.
So it has to be.
That's why I suggested there's no room for grace, but then you rightly raised some of the practical problems of trying to make something like that work, especially in a society where half of us are grace, half of us are greed, and they're not going to fit together very well.
No.
When we have a guest on this topic, it's going to lead to the discussion questions, which we'll get into some of these things more.
Yep.
Want to go on to the second one. Conventional economic culture also denies vocation. Conventional economics draws our aspirations away from vocation and service in favor of empty consumption. That is, the only purpose of life in our society is to consume stuff, at least according to The Economist. That's the only rational behavior to maximize your, they call it utility from consumption. In this view, service is just work, like serving others, is just work endured only to obtain money for consumption goods. An economy of the spirit begins with vocation of service as a sacred endeavor. You don't live just to get stuff, you live to do stuff, tempered by the necessity to consume in order to meet your lower needs, but also by the call to refrain from consumption to meet our higher needs. Now, one of the elements of the Franciscan rule of life is self-denial, that it doesn't deny that we need consumption goods in order to survive, but beyond what we need in order to survive a simple, basic life, we should be denying ourselves things we don't need. And this consumer-based economy is based entirely on get what you can get as much as you can get. Can that be cured? Well, would you go with, we live in a consumer-obsessed society?
So advertisers, people who can shift and influence desire, want, create needs, is some of the fuel which maintains a consumer culture. And part of the challenge with consumer culture is the lack of wisdom to determine what is needed as opposed to what is wanted, what is necessary as opposed to what is unnecessary but pleasant to own, to have, to purchase. And it is a challenge. Economics will never teach us how to be good consumers. I think because of advertising, we'll only be taught that we must have more. Was it not Rockefeller who was asked, how much is enough? And his response was, just a little more.
I think I've heard that, yeah. So we are, let me give a brief economics lesson in this. To the economist, there is only one purpose in life, and that is to maximize what they call the utility of consumption. Utility means the satisfaction we get from consumption, that we mix and match the consumer items that we can get our hands on in order to have the greatest possible maximum satisfaction. They call it utility just to keep us confused, but the only purpose in life is satisfaction from consumption. And we have the marketing industry, as you've been describing, has been very successful in keeping us obsessed with consuming more and more stuff. Now, then the question becomes, well, what's the antidote to that? And what I've been suggesting in the way that I wrote up that introduction, the antidote to consumerism is vocation. That our purpose in life, not, as I said it earlier, our purpose in life is not to have stuff. Our purpose in life is to do stuff. But you do have to watch that word vocation. In the secular world, vocation means going to trade school. I think, if I'm saying this right, I think in the Catholic world, vocation means being dedicated to your church. But in Protestant circles, vocation means following your calling. And so the antidote to obsession with consumption is getting people having a calling and considering that more important than just having more stuff. Am I making sense?
Yeah, so fundamentally, we ask the question, who am I and what am I? And from that fundamental question would flow what we feel as a lifestyle. And that means a determination to be who you think and what you think you are. And what we're talking about here is that we need to redefine who we are and not have the economists define who we are or advertisers define who we are. I know people who love shop therapy, buying therapy, that there is actually therapy in spending. No doubt that all comes from the drive of advertisers to buy into a consumer world. I read recently that people in the United Kingdom, 40% of the clothing in their closet they don't wear. And in the United States, depending on statistics and where you look at it, which may be similar to Canada, at least 20% of what's in your closet that you bought, you haven't worn, will wear once and never wear again. So, like, we know now, I think, that consumerism is not an answer to meaning and purpose, that the answer to meaning and purpose lies somewhere else. And I think there's a struggle between the advertisers and the economists and, the spiritual realm for people to define who they are and what they are. And I think this idea of the knowledge vocation really hits into a fundamental understanding of what it means to be human.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Like you,
vocation comes from the
this is
Latin.
no easy. This is no easy piece you have here. This is not a simple statement you've made here. What you're saying is almost a denial of humanity in economics, because what we're looking at is what does it mean to be human?
Yeah, what's the purpose in life is the way that I put it. Yeah.
Right, right. Okay, that's fine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do we stand a chance? Has the marketing industry got us so obsessed with consuming more and more and more? Are we ever going to change that?
Oh, yes, we are. Oh, yes, we are. Oh, yes, because the gospel will overcome. When it will overcome, I mean, how it will overcome. What's interesting is that, you know, the younger generation understand a whole lot more around creation care and sacred ecology than my generation, because they're living in a different world where they may not be able to afford a home, a house in which to pot up all the stuff you bought, fill up the garage. They won't even get to own a house. So, and not only that, but with improved communication, we are learning more and more the plight of poor people and the web of life, that our lifestyle is affecting other people. It's just that it's going to take a long time. Now, the gospel has a message too in what defines us to be human. Part of it, what St. Francis said, is to be in loving relationship with each other through Christ, loving relationship. So it's pretty radical. So, yes, the gospel has a radical message, but we're not going to get it through economics or advertisers.
Yeah, well, that's why I sometimes call myself an anti-economist. I'm fighting against economics in certain ways. Denial of abundance. That's the third one. Conventional economics asserts that the central fact of life is scarcity. There's not enough. There's not enough to meet all our insatiable wants. By the way, any economic model assumes that our wants are insatiable, that we can never have enough, and that the job of the economy is to help us meet those insatiable wants that never end. So we need the magic of the market to ration it out for us. An economy of the spirit makes two contrary claims. Infinite wants are not a good thing, and nature's bounty is more than enough to meet our finite needs. Production and distribution priorities need to be recast on a priority of needs before wants. Now, you've talked about needs before, that there's a difference between needs and wants. And I think of the quote by, I believe it's Mahatma Gandhi, saying there's plenty around for everybody's need, but there's not enough for everybody's greed. So one of the questions that comes to my mind is, if we all sought to have only the things we need to have a decent life, is there enough? Or is there never going to be enough to satisfy humans? Is scarcity fake?
So, in our fundamental understanding of what it means to be human, as Christians, we believe that the Creator has provided enough. And as Christians and as Franciscans, we believe the Creator has provided enough. But how it's distributed, how it's maintained, how it grows, those who have the resources to move, food and material around the world are the ones who are dictating to those, who are starving. Is there enough food? Well, What are we on? 8, 9 billion people now. There will come a point when that's a concern. Have we reached that point? I don't know. Is there enough food to feed the world? Oh, I think there is. Absolutely. Yes, there is. But can we go on increasing in population the way we
Mhm.
are? Probably not.
So
There's going
it's
to be problems down the road when we, grow it by another 50%. I mean, humans are slowly realizing, well, science is telling us that we are now realizing just how critical we are with the consumption of the Earth's resources. I think that, we need to rethink. Those who have need to rethink. And that's a big piece because we probably control the economy.
one of the issues inherent in that. I mean, I'm not disagreeing with you at all, but we don't recognize the difference between needs and wants. And economics does not deal with needs at all. It's totally about satisfying people's wants. And I remember talking to an economics professor when I was a student, what about needs? And he brushed me off. We don't talk about that. We analyze how you satisfy people's wants, and people's wants are too much. Now, you don't have to talk about destroying the environment. We got another section on that. Are we still, even if we're not destroying the environment, are we putting too much pressure on the Earth's resources? Are we trying to use up too much because we want more than we need? I'm suggesting here there has to be some recognition of the difference between wants and needs. We have a society in which greed is legitimate. Trying to get as much as you can possibly want is legitimate. And economists say that's the essence of rationality. And we want a society in which people are tending to their needs, of course. You need food, you need exercise, you need food, clothing, shelter. We can't deny ourselves that. But once you have that, people should be being moderate about getting more, but they're not. They continue to want more and more and more. My question is, how do we get from here to there where people start respecting the limitations of the earth? How do we get them from being greedy to being frugal? Can you, as a parish priest, do that?
That is my calling because the economy itself doesn't seem to have any morals and ethics. So we have to be the conscience of the culture, and part of the consumer culture is, an economy based on scarcity means, you need to run out and get it all now. I would say the basics of life are air, water, and clothing. So it's even more basic than that. And I'm more
Mm.
concerned about what we're doing to the air, the water, and just basic clothing. The problem is, I live in the north. I live in an inhospitable environment. I require more to live than someone who lives in a temperate climate, a climate where the seasons don't change. Because of where I live, I need there to be an abundance so that I can purchase because I live in an inhospitable environment. So, I can see why I have more wants than someone in other parts of the world.
I'm not sure if that's confusing terms because the way you describe them, they're not wants, they're needs. And wants are things in excess of what you need. And we are
I'm sorry, I
talking,
thought you said the economists doesn't see any difference between wants and needs. They're all the same. I'm
uh,
sorry.
they're all the same in the sense that there are no needs discussed, there are only wants discussed.
Okay,
So they
right,
don't make the
right.
distinction uh, in that way. Do you preach sermons about being frugal?
Well, you're taking this to another level now. Um, I think I think the challenge here is that defining needs in an affluent culture
That's a tough one.
is a tremendous challenge,
Yeah.
and
The,
it's a hard gospel to preach unless you live it as authentically as you can.
It's not hard for a Franciscan to preach because that's part of a rule of life. That rule number 2, I think, is called self-denial. When you have what you need, then you don't try to get more.
Well, I just think, yeah. So my wife is not a Franciscan. I am. I've covenanted with her in marriage 40 years ago. I have a commitment to children when I had them that they would have the opportunity to attend university to get a degree because we value higher education. So there are certain aspects that we built into our family life as needs that other families may say are wants. And I guess being prepared to legitimize them is important. But I mean, I can understand how scarcity works and creating a concept that there's a scarcity, therefore, we must get it before someone else gets it.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see that.
Okay, let's go to community here. The next
All
one
right.
on the list, denial of community. You know what that makes me think? Makes me think of something that Margaret Thatcher, the ex-Prime Minister of England, was noted as saying, "There's no such thing as society. There are only individuals." And that's actually a pretty common point of view. Conventional economics is intensely individualist. It claims that all desires arrive from deep inside the individual mind, uncreated and isolated from other individual minds. Its market model imagines we can put fragmented individuals together in a utopia of individual transactions in perfect harmony. An economy of the spirit recognizes that we're steeped in community from the very start, and we are shaped by our community down to the very language we speak. We need to balance the needs of our sacred community with the needs of individual self-expression. And I remember one time somebody was saying to me in a conversation, was saying there are only individuals. And my response was, "You said that to me in English. Where did you get that language?" That's why I'm saying it's steeped in community right from the start. So we live in a preposterous paradigm of obsessive individuality, as if we are nothing but individuals. So if somebody's saying to you, "There's nothing but individuals, there's no such thing as community," how would you respond to that person?
So our obsession with an individualist culture has been to the advantage of consumers, those who are providing goods and services to consumers. And that has worked very well to our detriment. Our fundamental understanding is that God created the world and that we are all equal and that we are all somehow connected in this creation. Francis, that's one thing he produced, was not only community, that we are related as, well, he would use the term brothers and sisters. Today, we would probably say siblings, but we are also connected to all that is created. In other words, there's a web of creation. That's why he said, brother sun, sister moon, brother rabbit, brother wolf, that it's all about, creation being a web, as it were, of interrelatedness. Part of what has happened, I think, is that our obsession with community has led to so much abuse, power to maintain community and order that now we have legitimately rights of individuals, commitments to safe communities, and charters of rights and freedoms in Canada. But we shouldn't see these things as threat to community, or that community is not the ideal human setting. I mean, a child cannot survive on its own. An infant is the most dependent creature, in creation, the human infant. I mean, we were, made to be in community. So I think that's one of my biggest concerns here in defining what it means to be human. It's that our humaneness is in community with all creation. So not only am I in community with you, but I am in community with the water and the air.
Mm-hmm. One of the expressions I like to use about that is the land is family. We need to balance the needs of our sacred community with the needs of individual self-expression. and it is talking about balance. And so my complaint is with the people who don't want that balance, who either want to flop over to the fanatical freedom side or flop over to the sort of fanatical community side. And one of them sacrifices community, the other one sacrifices individuality. So my position always is we have to be finding some kind of balance between them, which is really hard to do. And the failures that humanity has made in trying to do that cannot stop us from pursuing the project. But community doesn't always have to mean socialism, the way most people perceive it. Most of the socialism that I see in the world, and I've lived in China for 10 years, was just state capitalism. It wasn't really that different from corporate capitalism. And the community in the Acts of the Apostles, of the initial followers of Jesus, was a community of people caring for each other. They had no government. They just gave top priority to their brothers and sisters. And also, because this is a very indigenous thing too, I had an indigenous friend who came across some money. And just in conversation, actually just kind of talking to herself, really. She wasn't really talking to me. Her first thought was, how can I use this to benefit my community? And it is a sense of a people who have that kind of attachment to their community, just having the attachment to their brothers and sisters in the community, that I think we lack in this mainstream culture. You get back to the individualism question. So this one will be fodder for some good discussion questions when we find a guest to tackle this topic. In the interest of time, I'll go on to the next one, which is denial of the individual, which is a tougher one and a very Franciscan one. I was at the Catholic Franciscan Congress last year, and I was presenting some of this, and I gave the section denial of community, and that we have to give more credence to community. And then when I went on to that the capitalist economy also denies the individual, a person was surprised. If I'm going to be speaking for the community, then aren't I speaking against individualism? But we are Franciscans. The way I said it here, at the same time, conventional economics denies true individuality. Its paradigm offers only a meaningless drive for satisfaction with no purpose beyond more satisfaction. It leaves the individual an empty shell, and an individual with no content is nothing. An economy of spirit will give individuals the means to express their true self, which can be found only in their mission and partnership with the Creator. At the same time, we all have a little of the empty false self within us, so the challenge is real. That last one I get, first of all, from Thomas Merton, a theme which has been picked up by Richard Rohr, the distinction between the false self and the true self. The false self is me trying to be me all by myself. My true self is me trying to be me through God. And me trying to be me through God is a true individual. Me trying to be me all by myself without reference to anybody else is an empty shell. It's not really any meaningful kind of individualism at all. Does that sound Franciscan to you?
Oh, indeed, absolutely. I think that the word individual in some places now is being replaced by the word person. Would that change the tone of this particular piece if the word person was there?
Persona in the Latin, meaning the person, yeah. Actually, persona we might take to mean the soul of a person. And the soul of a person is not going to find any fulfillment except through God. So you can't just be an individual off doing your own thing. That's what I'm calling an empty shell. So I see you nodding your head. I think we're on the same page about this. So the suggestion is the mainstream ideology of society denies our community, but also denies our individuality because it gives us a false individuality. I'm quite grateful that Thomas Merton for developing that theme of the false self versus the true self. I think that's quite useful.
Jungian, I think Jungian psychology
Oh,
looks at
yes.
the
Jung is
ego
fascinating.
and even the archetype in a search, basically similarly in the search for the true self. What is the real self and the true self? You know, these are deep questions because again, it gets at what does it mean to be human? What does it mean to be
Mhm.
person? And it wants us to go on a deeper level than just consumer.
Yeah, so my real self is not a consumption junkie. Let's go to denial
There.
of the humble. Here's a really radical one. Conventional economics glorifies and empowers those who are overly entitled and those who are well endowed with material possessions. It claims that the poor are authors of their own demise by failing to utilize the resources of the free market to improve their lot. An economy of grace recognizes that many of the marginalized and broken are those who do not possess the grasping and aggressive nature often needed to thrive in the market arena. Those are the ones whom Christ cherishes. It will give priority to ensuring that those at the bottom receive the resources they need to discern their calling and pursue their mission in life, leaving the well-endowed to stand in line for a change. Now, that's pretty radical, isn't it? The first shall be last and the last shall be first.
I think that's a very poignant piece you have there, Denial of the Humble. And I think that speaks very well to our society and culture today.
So can we
That's an
really?
easy that one is an easy sell. That's an easy sell. I mean, it's an easy to see that.
Well, to most of society, that's a hard sell. Most people look at the homeless and think it's their own fault. Well, not maybe I shouldn't say
No,
most.
no, I mean no, what I mean is an easy sell is the understanding
Oh,
that
yeah.
conventional economics sees the poor as the authors of their own demise. That's an easy sell because I think
Well,
conventional economics
I see
does
what you
that
mean. Yeah,
very well.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, according to Christ, who said, "The first shall be last, and the last shall be first," this society is flipped upside down. It's the people on the bottom who should be revered because they don't have the grasping nature to claw their way to the top. But if it's been flipped, can it be unflipped? Can we really accomplish this? First shall be last, and the last shall be first. Or is that Christ being naive?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, we got the
I
answer.
just think that it's it it's a challenge for those who feel and are overly entitled and who are living that, those who are well endowed with material possessions. They're the ones who we might challenge.
They're the ones, if I
Those who
can put
have,
it.
they're the ones who have, as opposed to those who have not. I think that one of the challenges in our Canadian society and culture is the movement towards reconciliation with Indigenous people
Oh, yes.
who have been disenfranchised, who have who have signed treaties and then we have had them broken, who have lived in oppression for generations, and now we need to come to terms with that. And so our whole culture, the Canadian government, Parliament, is moving through the courts where they're being sued and losing cases, and is moving through the signing and honoring of treaties and re-honoring of treaties that they've broken. And so part of that is to work with people who are marginalized or broken. And I think that is like that's stirring the pot in Canadian culture. And it's moving out through other areas as well around housing for poor people, not an Indigenous issue, but housing for poor people, the cost of food. So, I think that there are things happening where we see where the economy has failed so many people.
That makes me think of, well, Americans listening to this might not know David Suzuki, who's a famous Canadian environmentalist, but also social commentator. And he's put out a series of his own podcasts that are on the CBC Ideas broadcast, basically saying that only the Indigenous people can save us. because, they have these non-acquisitive attitudes. I mean, you can't idealize them too much, but they have the kind of attitudes that you're talking about. And also they are very much aware of broken people, because they admit they have a lot of broken people themselves. But their emphasis is on if someone is doing you harm, it's a little bit different from what Jesus said. If someone's doing you harm, forgive them. They will say, if someone's doing you harm, heal them. That people who do you harm are broken people in need of healing. And everybody who's troublesome is really in need of healing. And that's what the thrust should be. And I think that's right along in line with what you're saying here, Jotie. Yeah.
When Bernard of Canterville and Francis went through the opening of the Gospels 3 times, they came up with this crazy idea that Bernard needed to give everything away. Sylvester saw what was happening, so he told him he wanted money for the stones, he gave for the building of San Damiano. So Francis gave him money, and when Sylvester went home, he wanted more. He came back, he said, "You didn't give me enough. I need more money." So Francis said, "Well, take whatever you need." And he was transformed by that. Sylvester became a brother. He was
Yeah.
so impressed by the authentic nature of Francis's desire to, heal this broken relationship we have with him, giving him all
Yeah.
this money that Sylvester said he was owed. Sylvester was just overcome by the gospel in that, and himself gave away everything and followed Francis.
Who was following the apostles.
Right. Well,
Okay.
Jesus.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well, following the apostles who were following Jesus. Yes. Justice, denial of justice, conventional economics. I keep talking about conventional or mainstream economics. I have to add the writer that there is a heterodox economics. There are rebels like me on the side. They're just not allowed into the mainstream, and they're not allowed into the policy regimes around the world. So I qualify it by saying conventional economics claims that justice is not a matter of concern because the truly competitive market automatically balances everything, ensuring that everybody gets what they deserve. So in this view, social justice is a collateral benefit of individual market choices. So let the market work, basically. If injustices arise out of market imperfections, we just need to make the market more perfect and it'll fix itself. An economy of grace recognizes there's no automatic fix, market or otherwise. Justice is a community project where people accommodate each other's needs in loving interdependence, and where a sensitivity to each other's well-being inspires them to ensure that nobody is denied the resources to live in dignity. So the suggestion there is the market gimmick claims to work and give everybody justice, but the market gimmick doesn't actually work and doesn't really handle much justice. But then justice is not a gimmick anyway. Justice is a relationship among communities and a relationship between people, and is people taking care of each other to make sure that everybody's needs are met. What do you think?
It's a challenge in the church because with the work and contribution of Constantine, the church was empowered with a power it hadn't had before. And with that power came a tremendous influence in the economic development of society and culture in the West. And the church helped create much of what we have, I think, in conventional economics. The church nurtured it, encouraged it, and it was truly a part of it. And looking at faith communities now and rethinking economies of grace is a pretty radical concept in the church. It was radical for Francis because what he was speaking against in not owning anything was contrary to the Benedictine monasteries that he saw to have great wealth and the abbots who were generals of war. And this whole idea of denial of justice is a whole new concept for the church to grasp. It is a difficult one for the church to grasp, but it is an essential one.
Mm-hmm. Now, my first complaint was justice is not an automatic result of perfect markets. that justice is a matter of loving your neighbor, basically, and making sure your neighbor gets what they need. I think that's the thrust of this, and I think we have quite some agreement on that. I like to use the word pockets of grace. It's a pretty tall order to make the whole world just, but you can create pockets of grace where you are with the people that you have, and have loving, just relationships between them, and work up from there. That's the thrust that I take on this.
Yeah. Well, it comes down to your definition of justice.
Yeah. Which is really what we talked about before in the first section, in terms of giving equal to what you get and getting equal to what you give. So it relates to section 1. 8, denial of Mother Earth. The land is family. Conventional economics considers the planet to be no more than a pile of resources waiting to be exploited by humans, as if we stood outside of it. While it's conceivable to do that at a sustainable rate, that would still be stripping the planet of its resources without reciprocity. Sort of treating it as an object to get stuff out of. They just want to get it sustainably. But it's not being done sustainably. The growth imperative doesn't permit that. The result is an ongoing degradation of God's garden. An economy of grace recognizes that the land is family. We are commissioned by God to care for Mother Earth, build a relationship of mutual nurturing, to seek her forgiveness when we ask too much. And indigenous people, when they kill a deer, will ask for that deer's forgiveness for making it feed our family. And we are to honor all our relations who live in the land, sea, and sky in full respect for all forms of life. One of the things I remember from Francis is one of the prayers where he prays for brother dirt. Even the dirt on the land is a brother. And now we are a totally exploitative culture. We look at Genesis saying we shall have dominion over the earth and say we can do anything we want. Let me put it this way. What would you say to someone who reads Genesis and says we're to have dominion over the earth so we can do anything we want?
I would say that Genesis was written 3,000 years ago with an understanding of God that we have since reevaluated with the arrival, of Jesus, and with the fulfillment of the incarnation. There's a new day. And to live by the Old Testament denies the New Testament, where it addresses the same issues. I just can't see people living by Genesis. I mean, think about the value of human life in Genesis. I mean, people were worthless. People weren't even considered human. They were subhuman in some cases. I just, people who want to live by the Old Testament I don't know how they justify that with being called into a relationship with all creation. My understanding is God so loved the world. God so loved the world. In Genesis, God created the world and all the world was good. And if it's all good, that means it's meant to be respected and cared for. So, John 3:16, God so loved the whole world. He loved it all. And if we're to live in the steps of Christ, we have to love it all and respect it all. And we're not doing
that. That's a good answer. Now, the other question relating to some of the things we talked about before, we are so addicted to affluence. We think we have a right to affluence above all else, and we're not going to give that up. We will kill to maintain our affluence. We will even kill the earth to maintain our affluence. We just won't give it up. Are we doomed?
Oh, yeah, we are, yeah. That's the story of Adam and Eve, isn't it? The story of Adam and Eve is broken relationships.
It is that too.
God said, why are you naked? Who told you were naked? Adam blamed Eve. Eve blamed the serpent. Broken relationships from the beginning.
Yeah. So we have a broken relationship with the earth then. Now, I want your comment on this. I respond to environmentalists who overstate their case a bit, and they do doom and gloom a little bit too much. And I say, I don't care so much about that. I'm not so concerned about saving our sorry butts from self-imposed destruction. Maybe we deserve it. I'm concerned about loving God's garden, nurturing God's garden, taking care of God's earth. And if that happens to save our sorry butts, that's fine. But that's not the reason we're doing it. We're doing it to love all of creation.
So reestablishing proper relationships is what I think Franciscan spirituality, you know, reestablishing a right relationship with God, reestablishing a right relationship with creation, which includes human and natural. I think that's what Francis was about. That's why it was brother rabbit, brother wolf, sister death, brother sun. And I think that as Franciscans, following the footsteps of our patron, we're called to reestablish, and Jesus came to reestablish, a broken relationship. He referred to God as a heavenly parent. He referred to God as creator. And I just think that, we're in a broken relationship here.
Okay, let's do this last one is a bit of a tough one for me. I wasn't sure how to do it. I wasn't sure how to express it. I titled it Denial. I called it Denial of Entitlement. And then a friend of mine, an Anglican priest from Quebec, said entitlement. I thought entitlement was a bad word. We say these rich people are all entitled. But I started thinking, isn't everyone entitled well, let me read it. Everyone is entitled to a place to call home, a community to call family, a role in which to live one's calling with dignity, the means to rise to life's challenges, and a path to the spirit which gives us life. But in the market culture of recent centuries, only commodities matter and power rules. Everything is up for grabs. Every sacred entitlement can be stolen and colonized by the forces of money or might. People of grace stand opposed to colonization in all its forms, historical and modern, appropriating the land of nature's children, canceling communities and cultures, imposing roles and identities, and corrupting the spirit. Now, I have presented colonization as something much more broad than just stealing the land from the indigenous people, that it is canceling their culture. I love using cancel because the right wing complains about cancel culture all the time. Well, I'm going to complain about cancel culture. You've attempted to cancel the indigenous culture completely, forcing people into certain ways of living, on the basis of which the anti-LGBT thrust is also a form of colonization. Because you're trying to cancel a culture, you're trying to not allow people to live their life. That's colonization just as much as not allowing them to have their land. So you're nodding as if you agree with me, or suggesting you agree with me. Is it right of me to sort of expand the concept of colonization that much?
I really like your opening statement.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone is entitled to a place to call home, a community to call family, a role in which to live one's life calling with dignity, the means to rise to life's challenges, and a path to the spirit which gives us life. I agree with that. I think that's profound.
Mm-hmm.
And I think these preliminary concepts of what it means to be human and person means that with that comes expectations. And to be entitled, for every person to be entitled to that is profound. Market culture, commodifies and allows power to rule. And everything is up for grabs. But I think we as a church need to remind ourselves first of what sacred entitlement actually is.
We have to study that a bit more, I think, and to educate ourselves about it. All right. I think we have maybe, hopefully, whetted a few people's appetites for this kind of discussion. And Jotie and I are both going to be making lists of people we can ask to be guests. People from our church, the Anglican Church of Canada, but also from the Episcopal Church in the United States, because we've had some dealings with them. And also, as I said, I went to the Catholic Franciscan Congress in Phoenix last summer and got in connection with people from the Franciscan Action Network and Franciscan Justice Circles, and a number of them would be interested too in sort of having a chat about this. So we don't have a schedule because podcasts give you the freedom of not having to have a schedule. It's just a list of things people can tune into when they're available. So we have to do our talking about who we're going to have and when we're going to have them. But for the listeners of this podcast, we've given you a little bit of a taste, and we invite you to keep your eye out for future discussions we're going to have about this. Any last comments, Jotie?
It's been a slice, and I look forward to delving into some of this with you.
Okay, great. Thank you, and bye-bye until next time.